Right, as stated in the previous video, I had not tested everything, so I'm just going to just filter in a few videos of me testing a variety of things. One of the first things that came up when posting my previous video was, what about Eclipse builds? Does status affect the shock? Honest opinion here, it's entirely up to you how you wish to build. However, my personal thoughts on building around the talent for St. Elmo's, the shock, is a complete waste of time. At base, the shock lasts maybe 2 seconds, 3 seconds, if that. You can see it in the background, and the idea of shock ammo on an AR is completely pointless because you're going to waste so much. It would be much better off on a rifle. Another one would be asking about vial mask. Yes, these are still options, but if they're good options, I'm going to personally say no. So I'm just going to put my Eclipse build on here. It is a complete yellow Eclipse, so it's not red. It is going to be weak on the old damage, but I've got status effect rolled pretty much everywhere. This is on a named elite, okay? Adding in 100% weapon damage over what we have now, which is like 10. It's not going to make too much difference in your overall DPS, especially if you are rolling for status. You would still want to be rolling for crit chance, crit damage. We now have our shock ammo. It lasts longer, and there's the spread, and it's literally over before I even look at the enemies. Status does affect the shock from St. Elmo's, but maybe by like 1 second or 2, maybe. It goes from being like 2 or 3 seconds to being 3 or 4 seconds. And then getting this to shock on the refresh rate is, you're going to drop it back down to like 2 or 3 seconds. So it's kind of pointless. What we're going to do here is just going to change over the range just so that we can potentially kill this red to get the shock to transfer over to the named elite, so we can see the refresh of Eclipse with this shock. Now, don't get me wrong, an increase in the shock duration kind of could be nice. Depends on how you want to play and how you want to build. But yeah, this is going to be like the average duration you get on the shock transfer, simply just because shock doesn't last that long anyway. In order to get the refresh, you need to kill the enemy. So being able to kill the enemy quickly and efficiently with the shock active for as long as possible, you're going to be cutting down the DPS of your build quite a bit, in which case you're not going to be transferring as much of that shock as you really would like. So the idea now is basically I'm going to try and get this enemy down as much as possible, now apply shock and kill, and yeah, we get like 3 seconds of shock duration spread. Yes, vial does work, but if you did notice, it still took me like 2 or 3 magazines to actually get 1, the shock ammo in, and then 2, the spread of it is just, it's, for me, this is completely not worth it. It's not really going to be beneficial or helpful for any build or playstyles. Like, congrats, you shocked the enemies for 1 second. Would you want a cookie? Like, I don't see the point in it. So for me personally, running a Eclipse St. Elmo's build is 100% not worth it. My general advice when building around St. Elmo's is just look at this bit. Pretend the rest of it doesn't exist. Well, except the attachments, but pretend the talent just doesn't exist. Because in terms of how you're going to build for it, the talent is literally going to give you 0. It's not actually going to give you anything. I personally see it as a detriment in a lot of play, simply just because it moves the enemies around. If they're behind cover, you shoot them with a shock round, they're going to stay behind cover. If they peek and then you shoot them, they're going back behind cover. It can be useful against things like chungers because it means you can kind of face tank them and they're not going to shoot back. It does kind of prevent enemies from interacting with a variety of different things, but in terms of outright overall performance, it's mostly not really worth it. Now, I won't lie, I have literally just woken up. It's like 6 AM when I'm doing this video, so I can't be asked running around the open world yet. I've got a lot to do today, so I'm just going to show some of the testing in the range. This is just a standard negotiators build. I'm not going to change anything. It's just a really boring, simple negotiators build. Going to put the range over here onto very hard, and hopefully we can just sort of see just the level of capability that this weapon has on things like gear sets, strikers, negotiators, even True Patriot. True Patriot with this weapon is actually, I'm not going to say it's like the best in slot meta, but it actually becomes a worthwhile DPS setup. Typically I'd argue True Patriot isn't really worth that much. However, now because of St. Elmo's, simply because of the weapon attachments, where you're able to get crit chance and crit damage, you're able to bolster the overall effectiveness and performance of True Patriot. On Negotiators itself though, this can work to your benefit with the shock. Tag a load of enemies, do what damage you can, and then basically to prevent one of them, because it's the big thing with Negotiators, is you'll tag like 2 elites, and then there's a chunga, and you want to shoot the chunga, and he just goes out of sight. It's like, well, the chunga's like the dumping ground, is where you want to put all of your ammo, and by the crit transfer, by the time you've killed the chunga, the 2 elites you've tagged will be dead. Shock ammo here could be useful, because it does mean as long as whatever you're dumping rounds into is the one you pick to essentially be the bearer of your shock ammo, you shock them, keep them in place to dump into, which maximizes the effect of Negotiators. It probably will take a little bit of practice, but it does mean that as long as you sort of get your 3 tags and then just dump into whatever with the shock ammo, you're going to get pretty much 100% efficiency from Negotiators, because they're not going to be moving around, they're not going to be jumping, they're not going to be moving into cover. You can essentially, hopefully, shock them while they're out of cover and then just completely lay into them. So on Negotiators, it could be a very, very worthwhile way to go. The issue is with things like Negotiators is we kind of have focus builds which are just going to outright do more. This is potentially going to be along within the meta crowd. The biggest drawback of St. Elmo's is just the simple fact of we can't use focus with it. Focus is going to be the hard one to compete with, considering things like even in like the strikers verse of builds, Dod-Foamath is still going to be king because of the RPM, because of the fact that we can put damage talents onto it. It allows for a lot more customizations. It's not that there's anything wrong with this weapon, it's just it's very hard to compete with weapons where you're able to put very powerful talents on, and then we get an exotic weapon that's like, oh yeah, have some shock rounds. Like, if we had a weapon attachment for this that was 50% crit damage, then fine, I would be on the hype train as well. Oh my god, it's OP. Possibly might need a little bit of rebalancing rather than using the word nerf. But on True Patriot, I mean, it's bugged out at the moment because range is good, especially when you start shocking things. I've got to shoot something else. Yeah, we get like a 71 round mag, 91 round mag. If we do the double load, we get 92. We can do some pretty serious DPS with True Patriot now. One, the massive increase in mag size is actually kind of worthwhile, because what you did lack in damage for the overall capability of True Patriot, it did mean that a lot of times you had to sort of put 2 mags into an enemy, whereas now it is just 1. So we're increasing our DPS because we're staying in burst rather than going into sustained. But along with just the generalized attachments, and essentially if you could trap a spawn with shock ammo and then just burn into 1, we're able to group up the enemies to proc the True Patriot explosion, which is potentially going to also be increasing our DPS, which is kind of nice. Again though, the explosion doesn't really do much because it scales off of your total armor and health, which is weird. Now for the final test I'm going to show, it is going to be ongoing directive. Now my ongoing directive build is a bit weird and wacky. However, the principle of what I said in my previous video does still stand. You pretty much do allow yourself infinite special ammo. Now the ordering of special ammo doesn't, I mean, I've seen a lot of people say like there's like priorities of what ammo is loaded in first. However, from testing this, for me, it literally just does seem what is to be loaded next. So even if you're mid magazine and ongoing directive procs and you have shock ammo in, the bleed ammo from ongoing directive will take over the shock ammo. However, if you have bleed ammo in and you've procced St. Elmo's which means your next reload will be shock ammo, or should be shock ammo. Even if you still have ongoing directive bleed ammo, shock ammo does still apply. This is where you're essentially able to chain continuous special ammo. The only way in which you're really able to not get special ammo is when you've run out of bleed ammo but you quite haven't done enough hits to build up the shock ammo, which happens about once every 4 or 5 magazines. As you can see, like, we're just chaining the bleed at this point. So we're just going to put this guy onto elite. Hopefully the damage still works, which it does. So we're still able to just one clip in elite. So we're going to put it on named elite. Give him a bleed. We still have 70 rounds of bleed, which means on killing this guy, we're going to get more bleed. However, on the previous stacking, I got shock ammo. So if I reload now, I go to shock ammo. So it kind of essentially allows for whatever is to be loaded next on the reload animation, whether that be bleed or shock, they will cancel each other out. Now, this isn't necessarily a bad thing, simply just because both will proc ongoing directive. The only bad part about it is you only get the amplified damage with hollow bullets, so you kind of want to keep hollow bullets up as much as possible. But it does essentially allow, I've run out of bleed bullets, but it's fine, because I just got the kill, straight back in, and we're able to get hollow point bullets again, on reload, straight to shock. Ideally, you do want to maintain your bleed bullets as much as possible. It's not so much that this build doesn't work, or running St. Elmo's on ongoing directive is a waste of time. It's just there are better ways of going about this, and they are typically using things like a FAMAS with Sadist, which will give you more damage. I've already shown how something like Flatline as a 15% amp will outperform St. Elmo's despite the fact that they have the same stats. A FAMAS which has a higher fire rate, and then if you add Sadist into it, because you're running essentially bleed bullets permanently, Sadist is a 20% amp, which will certainly do more. So not only is the RPM going to allow you to do more, adding in a 20% amp over a 15% amp will certainly allow you to do more. Anyway, that's going to be it for this part of the testing. Have fun, good luck, don't die. It's bad for the health.